couple finally gets the last laugh against their annoying neighbor.
But before we start, please make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell and smash that like button. We really appreciate your continuous support.
The issue had been simmering for years, but had finally come to a head. It was finally time to call it a day. After all the vindictive drama and police visits, they were finally in a position to improve the situation. She flashed a big grin, rang the doorbell, and handed over the teeny tiny piece of paper she was clutching. As a result, their lives were forever altered. Who'd have guessed that such a small piece of paper would turn out to be so pivotal in their lives? What was going to happen was completely unknown to the neighbor. It's something you've seen before. Revenge is best served cold. Emily Swanson and her husband had been saving for years in order to buy the Hawaiian home of their dreams. It wasn't easy living on a tight budget, but they were able to purchase a large house with 5 bedrooms, an oceanfront pier, and a large backyard with a little luck. The couple's overjoyed because they finally found their dream home. After all, they had to work hard for it. Everything was going swimmingly until they met their next-door neighbor. Nothing they'd ever experienced could have prepared them for this. The first issue arose after the couple got rid of an old playset. Tanya, an older woman who liked profanity t-shirts and leopard print, was the one who introduced them. None of them had expected to meet someone like Tanya. She stormed over to their primary residence and informed them they lacked legal permission to dispose of her children's possession. However, Emily maintained her composure and went on to make 2 important points to their next-door neighbor. To begin with, they found an old playset on their farm. When they inquired about it, the landlord of the duplex offered them permission to remove it. Second, given that the neighbor was well aware of the property border, it's surprising she went to such lengths. The kids were allowed to play in their own area of the yard, but they had to be considerate of other space. Because of what happened, Emily felt an immense bubble of hatred for this person form within her. She was startled awake by the sound of loud music. Tanya appears to have misunderstood that kids can play invitation as an invitation to a large family gathering on the entire lawn. Emily was very much irritated by what Tanya did. Because the event was for friends and family only, they were urged to stay inside, and Emily was furious. It didn't even come close to being the worst of it. We're very sure you'd feel the same way Emily did if something similar occurred to you. At the moment, Emily and her husband were in the living room and the noise was quiet as from there. Then one of the drunken partygoers walked in unexpectedly. Emily advised the guy the house he was looking for was on the opposite side of the street. Then the man told her Tanya said she owned the whole property and to use whichever bathroom. What he just said took Emily by surprise. What? She said. Emily was furious at this point after hearing what the inebriated guest said. Tanya surprised herself by charging in a tornado of cheap perfume and leopard print. The neighbor raged at Emily for having the audacity to make her neighbor seem terrible in front of her guests. Emily couldn't believe what she was seeing, particularly after Tanya's words. She also argued that denying tourists access to the restroom for a short time was disrespectful. Tanya didn't leave it just at that. She chastised the couple, telling them they didn't deserve such a large room to themselves. By the way, she wasn't finished. The couple couldn't believe Tanya's audacity. This led them to want to make a move and teach her a lesson. In any case, Emily and her husband decided they wanted a fire pit as well as an outdoor kitchen to their patio. It wouldn't be cheap, but the laborers were grateful for the opportunity to be paid well. Emily was rearranging some items on the terrace when she heard an unusual noise. Tanya could be heard above the din of the building. "What's going on here?" asked the neighbor. Emily went over the improvements they were making and Tanya's eyes grew brighter as she listened. She was clearly devising her own strategy. What was she planning? Let's have a look at what happened next. Emily was completely unaware her next-door neighbor was planning a new event in the yard they shared at the moment. She was engrossed with the construction and didn't realize what was going on or what Tanya was doing. Earlier in the day, Emily had been sipping her cortado and watching the workmen construct a fence. Before she overheard another tantrum from her current location, it had been a peaceful morning. Able to figure out what she heard? Tanya was furious with Emily for erecting a fence around their shared space. Emily and her husband exchanged a glance, and with this obnoxious neighbor, this was bound to be an issue. However, a new person appeared on the scene not long after. Tanya's boyfriend at the time was Billy. He immediately started throwing his beer cans and cigarette butts over the fence into Emily's yard. He stated he was acting in this manner because they were disrespecting his woman. That wasn't really the case, as we all know. They were genuinely shady next-door neighbors. They continued to have loud arguments and late-night parties, which didn't help. In this scenario, Billy was definitely siding with his girlfriend. We have no idea how he'd deal with anything like this if we were in Emily's shoes. It's also worth noting that Billy had a 30-inch fishing boat, and the problem was that their side of the home they only had 15 inches of dockage. Emily paid more for their side of duplex, therefore it was only fair they have more docking space. They had 150 inches to be exact. Emily and her husband supplemented their income by renting out the extra rooms. Boats can be secured to the property line and renters can make monthly payments. Tanya and Billy weren't pleased about this at all. When Emily came upon a new review for renting out docking slots on the internet, she was taken aback. It's pretty aggravating. According to the guy, the couple had been disrespectful to them. Let's see what the couple did after this. Emily and her husband were charged with violating a verbal agreement to use the docking room for another 3 months. After a quick conversation, she was able to figure out what was going on. It was finally time to call it quits. She was furious. Tanya and Billy must have pretended to be them while they were gone. They asked the client to remove the boat and he did so, then placed his own fishing boat in the same spot. When Emily saw what was done, she couldn't believe her eyes. She intended to involve the cops. It was beginning to spiral out of control. She'd had it and couldn't take it any longer. Something had to be done. The cops warned Billy and Tanya that if they didn't want their boat towed, they should drive it right away. It was on their property, the pair yelled, which was obviously a big lie, as we know. They even called Emily a liar, according to the two of them. They tried a new strategy after that. They went so far as to declare that no one could own the water in a frantic attempt to have things go their way. If it hadn't been for the neighbors, they would have spent their mornings eating fruit salad and gazing at the sea. No way to have a pleasant day with a cigarette butts and rubbish on their fence. Worse, the weekly gatherings started to become even more boisterous. Mischievous children have developed a new hobby of launching pyrotechnics at our ships. They definitely became rowdier than before, and it was fortunate that fate finally caught up with them. The problem persisted for months. The police even memorized the address thanks to the horrible neighbor. Emily was starting to lose hope that they'd never be able to relax again because of their annoying neighbors from hell. Tanya and Billy were transforming their heavenly enclave into hell. She began to wonder if they should all go and forget about all that happened because they were starting to believe they had no chance of getting rid of the obnoxious neighbor. Even if the officers took her side when they got involved, it didn't matter. When they had to spend their money, it felt like they were wasting their time and effort. Their lives had become inextricably linked with stress. What could they possibly do now? Emily was on the verge of giving up when the landlord approached her with a new chance. She must have been captivated by it because she didn't want to go down without a fight. What did the landlord say that made her optimistic for once? The elderly man was fed up with the housing market and refused to continue working as a landlord. He found that dealing with a crazy girl that never shuts her pie hole extremely unpleasant, and the landlord was clearly becoming tired of the specific woman as well. When Emily heard what she was saying, she couldn't believe her ears. He offered her a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to fix all their troubles with a flick of his finger. She couldn't believe how simple it was going to be. He needed to sell the other half of the house as soon as possible. His first impulse was to inquire about Emily and her husband's involvement. For a variety of reasons, Emily's decision to purchase the house was a wise one. Her elderly parents, for one thing, were able to join them at the house. She was relieved the procedure gone smoothly. She began working on what she would soon do as the paperwork is completed. They weren't complete knuckleheads. Before the big day, they registered an LLC and double-checked the end of the lease on the duplex's other side. Emily and her husband also made sure the notification papers would send over to Tanya. Knowing what she was about to do, she was filled with nothing as delight as she was knocking on Tanya's door, handing her the letter and demanding the rent. Emily must have found the couple's reaction amusing after she handed them the letter. Tanya also had, much to her surprise, moved in with her own mother. The older mom was humiliated by her daughter's conduct. In fact, Tanya's mother expressed regret for what happened in the past few years because of the daughter. "I didn't raise my daughter to live like this," she told Emily. As Tanya realized what transpired, her cheeks flushed with humiliation and anger. When she saw what happened, she was taken aback. She couldn't believe what her daughter did there. Emily had no idea she'd be able to create such an alliance. Thanks to the older woman, they were able to keep peace in the duplex. Aside from that, she was an enjoyable person to be around. Every Wednesday evening, Emily and the elderly woman would bake and drink. Tanya felt nothing but anger during the entire time. She'd be upset, of course, but there was nothing she could do about it. After all, she was just reaping what she sowed. Emily and her husband didn't treat her terribly in any way. They were all right with them staying there for the same price while they were still on the search for a new place to live in. Her feelings for the elderly woman grew significantly stronger. No matter how quick or abrupt the separation, Emily would find it difficult to say goodbye to her and her friendship. After some time had passed, they finally left the house. Their possessions were loaded into moving trucks and driven away. Tanya, on the other hand, had no plans to go quietly. She wanted to go out with a bang. She smuggled another ill-meaning note into the mailbox. It was much more enjoyable because she did it on animal print paper. Emily took a deep breath and exhaled a sigh of relief. She was finally able to unwind. She could finally enjoy her own patch of paradise years after moving there. Everything had taken a long time, but it had been well worth the wait. She must have been happy with herself for not giving up and persevering till she arrived at this point. After what had happened, there was little doubt that all those years of tolerating Tanya hadn't been in vain.